Hi folks, I'm Joe and welcome to the channel. In this micro lesson, I wanted to show you how you can find intervals on the guitar. And you might say to yourself, well, why would I want to know that? That sounds incredibly boring. Well, intervals are a critical part in developing your ear so you can pick out songs. You can identify lead lines or chord progressions just simply by knowing and understanding what the intervals are. And also, lots of times as guitarists, we're just playing patterns. Sometimes we don't even know the notes we're playing, or again, the intervals that we're playing. So let's say we wanted to practice our soloing, and we wanted to target the third of each chord. Well, I need to know where the third is. Let me go ahead and grab a guitar, and we'll dive into this subject. So before I go ahead and show you the interval on a guitar neck, what exactly is an interval? That might be helpful. An interval basically is the distance between two pitches. And you usually start with a root note, and then when you play a second pitch, that distance can have a name, an interval name. Now there's basically 11 intervals between the octave, so 12 intervals total. For the sake of this lesson though, I'm going to focus in on the major scale because the major scale and its intervals is basically where you start for ear training and also to understand formulas to build scales and chords off of. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the interval on one string only, just so you can see the distance between the notes. And then I'm going to show you the interval across strings, because it's important to know both on the guitar. You know, one of the challenges about the guitar is it's not that visual like a piano. Like, it's harder to see things like intervals or how chords are made up and things of that nature. Like, when you look at a piano, you can clearly see how maybe a triad is made because of the distance between the keys that you're playing. Well, it's a little bit harder to do that on a guitar, so I'm going to show you both ways. So let's start with the wonderful key of C. And so we're going to play the C, the root note, starting on the 3rd fret of the A string. So the first interval that we're going to encounter is a major second. And it happens to be 2 frets away. The next interval is a major 3rd. The next interval is a perfect 4th. The next interval is the perfect 5th. The next interval is a major 6th. You can see we're starting to cover some ground. And the last one is the major 7th. And I should really say the last one, I'm sorry, is actually the interval. It's actually the octave. So we can see here you can go quite a ways to get between the different spaces of those notes. Now, let's look at these intervals across the guitar strings. Well, for the major 2nd, we're basically going to play in the same spot. And that was an E, not a C. Now, for the major 3rd, we can actually grab that on the next string over, which would be the E here on the D string. And you're probably familiar with that interval a lot because that's basically making up your chords if you know your C chord. The perfect 4th. And lots of times when people are learning these intervals, they associate them with melodies of songs. So the perfect 4th is always associated with Here Comes the Bride. The perfect 5th and that you're probably familiar with power chords, right? That's why they're called power chords. There's no 3rd in them. It's just the root and 5th. The major 6th. Now we're going to jump over to the G string and pick up the A here. The major 7th. So I'm picking up the B here on the G string. And then the octave. Now that works well in this position and on these lower strings, and this can apply to any key that you're in. So if you're thinking about, maybe let's look at the key G. If I want to know where the third is, it's always going to be 1 fret behind on the next string over. The fourth will always be in line with the root. The fifth will always be a fret, 2 frets apart on the next string. So I think you see and get the idea here. Now, this gets a little bit different, right, when we get to the G string, though, and going over to the B string because of the way the guitar is tuned. So in this case here, if we were going to start with C, and we want to play our second, we could still go up. Major second. Now our third, which traditionally on these strings would be 1 fret behind, it's actually a cross because of the way, again, the guitar is tuned. So now we have our third here. And our fourth now is up. 1 fret from that. The fifth. The sixth is no longer spaced the way it was like this. It's again across the string, across the same fret. But now you're starting to see why people say, hey, play some nice cool 6. Because that's the interval that they're referring to. And then the 7th and the octave. So that's basically where your intervals are on the guitar. And I encourage you to practice them both this way, but also down. So let's look where would be the 5th on the G string. It's a cross. The 4th is down here. The 3rd is open. And just get familiar with knowing where these intervals are and also listen to them. And if you can attach the intervals to, again, basic melodies that you're familiar with and memorize them that way, when you hear them in a song, when you hear those intervals played, you can start to pick out songs and guitar parts by ear. Now, in the beginning of the video, I mentioned that these are important to know, obviously not just for ear training, but also for playing. So if someone yelled out to you, hey, let's play a 1-4-5 in the key of G, you need to know where those chords are. What is a 1-4-5? Well, we know the 1 is the root, the 4 they're referring to the perfect 4th, and the 5 is they're referring to the perfect 5th. So if we're in the key of G, if we just basically grab the root, we know that's the 1. And basically, based on this whole exercise that we're doing here, we know the 4th is right next to it on the next string over, same fret. And the 5th is 1, 2 frets up from that 4th. So now we can basically play G, C, and D. We know now that's a 1-4-5. Another useful thing is, hey, how do we build chords? Well, if you start to know the formula, the chord, to build a chord, basically is a root, a 3rd, and a 5th. So let's go ahead and start with C again. Root, 3rd, and 5th. But we know that this G can also be an open string. So we can play root, 3rd, 5th. And let's say you're in a different part of the guitar neck, and you need to understand where the root, the 3rd, and the 5th is, right? So let's go ahead and do C here. So if you want to play some sort of arpeggio lick, you now know those notes that make up those chords. Or let's say you were soloing and you wanted to target the 3rd or the 5th of a chord. You now know where it is in relation to the root note. And you can see where this concept is going. You can apply it to understanding then also the pentatonic scale that you've always been playing, right? So let's say we're playing this pentatonic scale. Well, what notes are we playing here? Well, if we look at it, we're playing the root, the flat 3, the 4, which is the perfect 4th, the 5th, and the flat 7. So now you know the intervals that make up the famous pentatonic scale. So again, when you're practicing this, practice all the different intervals, listen to what they sound like, and then maybe if you play something that you're familiar with playing, maybe there's a certain scale or run or a chord that you're playing, stop for a second and analyze the intervals that make up that chord, just so you can get more familiar with how you're actually incorporating them in your own playing. Well, that's another micro lesson down. If you have any ideas for other micro lessons that you might like to see, please leave them in the comments below. I always welcome your suggestions. And while you're down there, consider helping me grow the channel by subscribing down below and hitting the like button. All these things help me out, and I'm very grateful for your support. As always, I wish you a wonderful day.